At 6:42 on a Sunday evening, my brother stood in our parents' dining room and told 12 relatives that I had bankrupted his company. $600,000, he said, setting his glass down hard enough that the wine trembled. Gone, because someone in this family refuses to invest in her own blood. My name is Bridget Sawyer. I'm 34, and I had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, eating my mother's pot roast, saying almost nothing, the way I usually did at these dinners. My brother Connor liked to talk. I liked to listen. That had been the shape of us since we were kids. And somewhere along the way, it had simply become the family's expectation of me. Connor, sit down, our mother said, glancing nervously around the table. No, Mom. Everyone should know I built Ridgeline Freight from nothing. And my own sister wouldn't lend me a dime when the company needed it most. He looked straight at me. You've had money sitting around for years. You could have saved us. Instead, you let us drown. I set my fork down slowly. Connor, I didn't refuse you anything. You never asked me. I asked Dad to ask you. Same thing. It wasn't the same thing. But I didn't say that. What I said was, what happened to the company? What happened, he said, his voice rising, is the parent company pulled our credit line without warning. 6 months of missed shipments. 2 clients gone. My own management team looking at me like I failed them. He shook his head, and nobody in this family lifted a finger. Around the table, my Aunt Sharon shook her head at me. My Uncle Paul muttered something about family loyalty. My father stared at his plate the way he always did when he didn't want to take a side. None of them knew that I had been the one who approved his hiring 3 years earlier. None of them knew that the parent company he was blaming, Cascade Holdings, belonged to me. I had built it quietly, deliberately, starting with a single warehouse contract when I was 26, long before Connor ever floated the idea of starting Ridgeline. I had never told my family the full extent of it, not because I was ashamed, because every time I tried to talk about work at these dinners, someone changed the subject to Connor's latest deal. Connor's new office, Connor's plans to expand into 3 states by next year. So I stopped talking about it. I let them believe what was easy to believe, that I worked in logistics somewhere, whatever that meant to them. I never corrected it. I told myself it didn't matter, that my work could stay mine, quiet and separate from all of this noise. It mattered now. The credit line was pulled, I said carefully, because of missed loan covenants. 3 quarters in a row. Connor's head turned toward me sharply. How would you know that? I looked at him for a long moment. 12 years of staying quiet sat behind my next words. And for the first time in a long time, I decided not to swallow them. Because I signed the order to pull it, I said. Connor, I own Cascade Holdings. I've owned it since before Ridgeline Freight existed. The room went completely silent. Connor stared at me like I had spoken in a different language. You what? I own Cascade Holdings, I repeated. I have for 8 years. It started as one warehouse contract outside Richmond, back when I was 26. I built it up slowly. Freight brokerage, then a logistics network, then a holding company. Ridgeline Freight has been one of our subsidiary partners for the last 3 years. That's not possible. His voice had dropped, but it wasn't calm. It was the voice of someone doing math in his head and not liking the answer. I signed my contracts with a company called Cascade, some regional office in Delaware. I never dealt with you directly. You dealt with my vice president of operations, Marcus Feld. I told him from the beginning I didn't want my name on your paperwork. Why? My mother asked quietly. It was the first thing she'd said in several minutes. I looked at her, and for a second, I felt something loosen in my chest. Because every time I tried to talk about work at this table, somebody changed the subject back to Connor. I stopped trying to compete for 5 minutes of attention. I just built what I wanted to build, quietly, on my own time. So this is about attention, Connor said, his face reddening. You've been sitting on a company worth tens of millions, and you let me almost lose everything because you wanted to prove a point? No, Connor. I pulled the credit line because Ridgeline missed 3 consecutive loan covenants. That's not personal. That's how lending works. Any bank would have done the same thing. You're not a bank. You're my sister. I'm both, I said. And I can't run Cascade Holdings by making exceptions for family. If I let your loan slide because you're my brother, I'd have to explain that decision to my board and every other business owner who follows their covenants on time. My father finally looked up. Bridget, why didn't you tell us any of this? I tried, Dad. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I mentioned we just closed our 4th distribution center. You asked me to pass the potatoes. It wasn't said with anger. It was just true. And saying it out loud for the first time felt strange. Like setting down something heavy I hadn't realized I was holding. Aunt Sharon, who minutes earlier had been shaking her head at me, now sat very still, her wine glass untouched. Connor pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. So what happens now? You just watch the company collapse? No, I said. I already asked Marcus to draft a restructuring proposal this afternoon before I came to dinner. Extended terms, a temporary rate reduction, and a check-in every 30 days instead of every quarter. It's sitting in your inbox right now. Connor blinked. You did that today before any of this happened? I've been trying to help you the whole time, Connor. Just not in front of an audience and not by pretending I don't understand my own business. The room stayed quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of shock. The silence of everyone at that table realizing how much they hadn't known about me. And maybe how much they hadn't asked. Nobody moved for a moment. Then my mother stood up and started clearing plates that didn't need clearing. The way she always did when she needed her hands to do something other than shake. Connor sat back down slowly, like his legs had stopped fully trusting him. I need to see the proposal, he said. Not angry anymore, just tired. It's in your inbox, I said. Cascade letterhead. Marcus copied me, but you can call him directly tomorrow at 9. He'll walk you through every line. And if I can't make the new terms work either, then we talk again. That's not a threat, Connor. I'd rather restructure a partner's loan than watch a company collapse and lose the relationship along with it. My father cleared his throat. 8 years, he said, mostly to himself. You built all of this, and we found out at dinner. You didn't find out at dinner, Dad. You found out because Connor stood up and accused me of something that wasn't true. I wasn't planning to announce anything tonight. Would you ever have told us? Aunt Sharon asked. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It sounded almost embarrassed. I thought about that honestly before answering. Probably. Eventually, when it felt like the right moment instead of a moment I had to defend myself in. Connor rubbed his face with both hands. I said things at this table I shouldn't have said. In front of everyone. You did, I said. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise, and I didn't think he wanted me to. I was scared, he admitted. The bank calls, the missed shipments, watching guys I hired look at me like I was failing them. I needed someone to be the reason, and it was easier if the reason was you instead of me. It was the most honest thing my brother had said to me in years, and it landed somewhere soft in my chest, underneath all the frustration from 20 minutes earlier. I get that, I said. I've had nights like that too, just usually with a spreadsheet instead of an audience. A small, surprised laugh escaped him. The first real one all evening. My mother set down the stack of plates she'd been holding and finally looked at me directly. I want to understand your work. Really understand it. Not just hear about it in passing. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. Connor reached across the table, an old habit from childhood I hadn't seen in years, and gently tapped his knuckles against mine. Thank you, he said, for fixing this before you even knew I'd blow up about it. You're my brother. I wasn't going to let Ridgeline go under over a paperwork technicality. Fair, he said. And there was something like a smile underneath the exhaustion on his face. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the relatives had gone home still talking quietly among themselves, my father found me alone in the kitchen. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for tonight, for every dinner where I asked you to pass the potatoes instead of asking what you were building. You're here now, I said. That's enough of a start. I know, I said. But thank you for saying it anyway. He leaned against the counter, looking older in the kitchen light than he had at the head of the table an hour earlier. Your mother told me once you'd left a good job in New York to move back to Virginia. I never asked why. I assumed it was homesickness. It was partly that, I said, but mostly I wanted to build something on my own terms, close to home, without anyone telling me it was too risky or too small to matter. And instead, we told you it didn't exist at all. You didn't know it existed. That's different than telling me it didn't matter, even if it felt the same from where I was sitting. He nodded slowly, like he was turning that distinction over and deciding it was a kinder one than he deserved. 3 weeks later, Connor called me on a Tuesday afternoon, not to talk about the restructuring, but just to talk. He told me his first shipment under the new terms had gone out on schedule, and that one of the clients who'd left during the crisis was asking about coming back. I told him that was good news, and I meant it. I looked up Cascade's other subsidiaries, he said. You've got 11 companies under that holding group. I had no idea. Most people don't. I built it that way on purpose. Would you ever want to talk about it? Not to prove anything. I mean, actually talk, like business owners do. I smiled, sitting alone in my office with the late afternoon sun coming through the blinds. I'd like that a lot. We started having lunch every other Thursday after that, something we hadn't done since college. Sometimes we talked about Ridgeline. Sometimes we talked about Cascade. Mostly we just talked. The way siblings do when nobody's keeping score. My mother asked for a tour of one of my distribution centers a month later and stood in the middle of the warehouse floor looking genuinely amazed. The way she used to look at Connor's early sales figures. My father started asking real questions at dinner instead of changing the subject. And even though it felt strange at first, I answered every one of them. I never told the extended family the full story of that night. Some things didn't need retelling at every holiday. but something had shifted permanently at that table. A quiet recalibration in how we all saw each other. I used to think being underestimated by my own family was something I'd simply learned to live with. I hadn't realized how much energy it had taken to stay small on purpose until I stopped doing it. Connor still calls me for advice sometimes, and I still remind him gently that covenants exist for a reason, but we laugh about it now instead of arguing. Looking back, I don't regret staying quiet for those 8 years. It taught me patience and exactly who would show up for me once the truth was finally on the table. What I regret is thinking silence was the only way to keep the peace. Some truths are worth saying out loud, long before anyone forces your hand.